traveling around in your thoughts. Your questions, yourself. Please bend your knees and stand your feet. Begin to explore rolling your pelvis a little forwards and backwards in disorientation. Just notice, what is it that you observe? What do you sense happening through the length of your spine? How are you doing this? Are your feet part of the action? Use your feet on the floor a little bit. How do you feel the change in contact of the back of your pelvis with the floor? The change in the curves along the length of your spine. You feel the movement traveling upwards and echoing a little bit in your head. You feel your head rocking a little on the floor. Please pause and open your knees to the side and put the soles of your feet together. Find out what it's like to roll your pelvis now. So it's still possible to press the edges of your feet on the floor. But so try that. Know what that feels like and how that influences the relationship of your pelvis to the floor, how your pelvis leans on the floor or changes its way of leaning. Notice the influence on the movements of your legs as you roll your pelvis forwards and backwards. And then don't use your feet. Leave your feet and legs resting. And you'll find now, perhaps you feel a mobilization in your abdominal muscles and in your lower back muscles a little more clearly. Or maybe you don't feel a sense of the mobilizing muscles, but you feel a change in shape that you're making. Maybe that you sense that you're folding or lengthening in one dimension of yourself. Okay, leave it, rest a moment on your back. Please roll yourself up to sitting. Sit, leaning on your hands behind, the soles of your feet together. And just notice the shape between your legs. The shape that's formed with your feet being joined like this, and the distance of your knees from the floor. Roll, so you're beginning somewhere. Your feet are a certain distance from your pelvis, there's a certain angle of each of your legs in the knee. Roll your pelvis a little forwards and backwards. And notice what's happening through the length of your spine. As you roll your pelvis forwards in the direction of 12 o'clock, if you're sitting on that clock dial, what happens through the length of your spine? Do your knees get further apart from each other, closer to the floor, or lift a little away from the floor? Now explore the position of your feet relative to yourself. So you keep the soles of your feet together, but bring your feet closer to you and roll your pelvis forwards and backwards several times, and notice if it makes any difference in your ease or of the movement, or what participates. And then try moving your feet away from you, further away. And roll your pelvis forwards and backwards. And notice, is there any reflection of the movement in your head, of your head, in space? When your pelvis moves in the direction of 12 o'clock, where's your head going? Is it going backwards towards 6 o'clock? Or forwards towards 12 o'clock? Okay, pause in sitting. And come back and lean on your hands again. This time, can you move your pelvis a little bit to the left? Shift the weight more onto your left side of your pelvis. And come back to the middle. In a way that your left knee moves towards the floor, your left thigh moves towards the floor, and then come back. See how it is for you to use yourself to move in this direction. And how are you doing that? What's happening through yourself? What happens? What do you do with the right side of your pelvis when you move your weight to the left, more onto the left sitting bone? What happens through your spine, in your ribs, with your shoulders and your head? And then explore moving to the right. So shifting your weight onto the right side of your pelvis, so that your right thigh and knee moves in the direction of the floor. Listening to how are you doing that? What happens through your back? So you could just rock your weight over and lean everything over onto your side. But when you do that, it doesn't necessitate a change necessarily in the action of what's happening through your spine. So feel what happens in your lower back between your ribs. So when you move so go left and right now. And as you go to the left, feel what happens between your ribs on the right side and your right side of your pelvis. Does your lower back tend to arch a little bit more? And what do you do with your shoulders? So as you shift your weight onto your left sitting bone, your left thigh goes towards the floor. Do you use one hand more than the other? Do you lean on one hand? Do you press one hand into the floor more? So take your pelvis to the left and try. Which hand is it easier to pick up now? The left one or the right one? Does that give you any understanding of what you need to do to move yourself there? Okay, try moving to the right. So your right knee, thigh, comes closer to the floor. And does it help if you press a little bit with your left hand? Does that help you find some way of moving yourself in your lower back and your ribs that if you don't use your hands, it's more difficult? Okay, leave it, rest on your back. Listen to how your pelvis is relating to the floor. Your breathing. And roll yourself up to sitting again. Sit in the same position. Soles of your feet together and begin to roll your pelvis a little forwards and backwards. Notice, what do you do with your abdomen as you do that? There. Have any sense of using your belly in a way when you move your pelvis backwards? Or move your pelvis forwards? You have any sense of your lower back lengthening when you roll your pelvis backwards and arching a little more as you roll your pelvis forwards? Continue to do that movement. And let's add something. While you roll your pelvis forwards and backwards, could you draw your abdomen in and push your abdomen out? Notice, how do you time that intention with your action? Do you pull your belly in when you roll your pelvis backwards? And push your belly out when you roll your pelvis forwards? It doesn't, how big a movement does it need to be to know that that's what your intention is to do? So try the opposite. Try pulling your belly in a little bit when you roll your pelvis forwards and pushing your belly out when you roll your pelvis backwards. And often that'll highlight something like in that YouTube that you just watched, when you've got a very particular way of organizing an action in the timing and the coordination, it feels almost impossible to begin with. And that's natural, because your nervous system hasn't resourced all the sensory experiences that could link a different or novel way of moving. Okay, and then forget about your belly, or not, and just roll your pelvis a little forwards and backwards. And notice, does that feel any different at all? A little easier, a little simpler? Maybe there's a difference in how much your legs are moving in space. Okay, and then rest on your back. Observe again the relationship and where your pelvis is lying. And what sort of image you have of your pelvis right now. Could you bend your knees and stand your feet? Roll your pelvis a little downwards. So it has a different words to describe it now because you're in a different orientation. So downwards would be in the direction of your feet so that your lower back would lift a little away from the floor. And then roll your pelvis headwards so your lower back moves closer to the floor and your tailbone lifts a little away from the floor. And it's common that we talk about, one way of talking about the direction of the pelvis is to think about the rim at the back. So when the bones at the back of your pelvis are moving forwards, it's a forward tilting, but it also changes the orientation so your pelvis tilts downwards a little bit. As your coccyx goes down towards the floor. Is your pubic bone in your image at the moment? So bring your fingers to your pubic bone. You know, it could be your thumb and your index finger of each hand to each side of your... There's a joint in the middle where the two pubic bones meet. And see, can you find that bone for yourself? Low down and put a finger. It's quite a large bone. It's got depth and width. Is there somewhere where you can comfortably, a little bit away from the midline, contour your fingers to the shape of the bone? And now roll your pelvis a little bit footward and a little bit headward. And notice, can you sense the pubic bone moving with your fingers? So as the orientation of your pelvis changes, so does the orientation of your pubic bone. So as you roll your pelvis downwards and your lower back arches a little bit, comes away from the floor, your pubic bone moves downwards. Then as you roll your pelvis upwards, your pubic bone moves away from the floor, and perhaps it even has an upward direction relative to your head, depending on what's available for you through the differentiation of your spine and the changing curves of your spine. Can you use your fingers to help the motion? And what are you doing with your belly? So as you roll your pelvis downwards, using your fingers to help, can you expand your lower abdomen a little bit? So push your lower belly out, down near your belly button. See if you feel your belly expanding over your pubic bone with your fingers. And then as you roll your pelvis upwards, pull your belly in a little bit so your belly button sinks backwards towards the floor. Just notice, does that assist anything in your sense of or image that you form of how you're moving your pelvis? How are you coordinating your breathing with this movement of your pelvis? Do you breathe in as your pelvis rolls backwards and your lower back flattens and your pubic bone moves upwards a little bit relative to the floor, relative to you? And breathe out as you go in the other direction? Or do you do the opposite? Rest a moment. Pause. So in my practice, sometimes it does serve a person to become more aware of the work and tonus in their musculature. And that might be a particular approach I take. And other times, it can appear like the pelvis, that the person doesn't even have a skeleton. That they're all muscle. And so for them, maybe it's more important to try and help them sense their skeleton in a particular way. And in practicing, in working and creating learning situations for clients, we want to have many different options. The way we know how to do best, or what served us to discover about something about ourselves, will be really useful because you know that way well. But then there are, in my practice, always clients, if I get habituated into working in a particular way, I can think, why is this not working? Why am I getting stuck? And I need to reconsider, what is it that this person needs to learn about themselves that will make a difference for them. Sometimes it's in their thinking more, sometimes it's in their action more, sometimes it's in their sensing, sometimes it's in their feeling, or a different proportion of each. But it's an environment that we learn to constantly adapt in order to serve what it is that someone wants to learn about. And I really admire the guy on the YouTube for his persistence and his motivation to really see how long is it going to take him to learn something, and then recognizing that he had the knowledge, but that didn't make the difference. That until he developed the feeling sense, the sensory motor understanding in his system and with the environment, he couldn't orchestrate the action. But then one day, it all came together. And from one day not being able to do, the next day he was. And that somehow happens, but we can see and hopefully recognize those moments where we get glimpses in the direction that we're searching in. Little pieces of the puzzle come together and then they disappear again. And then maybe they reappear a little later with more dimension. Please roll yourself up to sitting again. Lean on your hands behind, the soles of your feet together. Play with the orientation of your hands, the direction your fingers are pointing in, or where you're placing your arms. And observe your breathing as you're sitting here. Could you gently begin to breathe in a way that as you breathe in, you pull your belly in a little bit and expand your chest? And as you breathe out, you push your belly out a little bit and shrink your chest. But don't do it well. Notice how is it to begin to sense what you're doing. Feel what you're doing. Recognize, does it fit your intention? And as you shift your awareness around yourself to notice what's happening as you do this. Does it influence your pelvis? Can you feel an echo of this movement in your pelvis? So it's that seesaw movement of breathing where you pull your belly in and you expand your chest, and then you shrink your chest and push your belly out. And you've already discovered, I think, in lessons that you've done, that you can separate your breathing from the action. The usual thing is to breathe in as you expand your chest and breathe out as you expand your belly. Notice, do you feel any rocking motion of your pelvis as you do this? If you don't, could you begin to introduce a little forwards, backward motion of your pelvis and see what fits? As you pull your belly in and expand your chest, you roll your pelvis backwards or forwards. And as you push your belly forwards, shrink your chest, back arches a little bit, or round. So let go of the breathing and just roll your pelvis forwards and backwards now. See what that's like. And then leave it. Take a pause on your back. What do you notice about how your pelvis is lying now? Your spine. Could you bend your knees and put the soles of your feet together, lying on your back? Roll your pelvis a little headward so that the back of your pelvis comes close to the floor, the vertebra of your lumbar spine come close to the floor. Your coccyx lifts a little, and then roll your pelvis the other way, downwards, so your back of your pelvis tilts away from the floor. Your pubic bone moves downwards and towards the floor. So bring your hands to your pelvis. So you can bring your hands to the bones at the front of your pelvis and continue rolling your pelvis upwards and downwards. Try it with your fingers on your pubic bone. So most of you look like your fingers are higher than your pubic bone. So just sit up for a moment. Have a look. This is your pubic bone. So you've got the bony parts at the front of your pelvis. And then if you come down low, just above in the crease of the angle between your leg, and keep going down and forwards to the center of yourself, it really is possible to hold that bone between your thumb and your index finger. So I'm seeing a lot of hands that look like they're more up here. Can you find it for yourself? Yeah? So it's not going to be under or between your legs, it's going to be higher up at the front. It's always a surprise for people to find it. I do help clients find it on themselves. I will actually also hold someone's pubic bone, but usually get someone else to put their hand first, just because it's a can be a sensitive place for people. Okay, lie back on your back, soles of your feet together, and explore. Can you find your pubic bone? And then keep your hands there, follow the motion of your pubic bone as part of your pelvis as you roll your pelvis footward and headward. Could you put one hand, slide one hand under the small of your back, leave one hand on your pubic bone, and roll your pelvis forwards and backwards, and see if you can feel the relationship. They form, the pubic bone is at the front of the bowl of your pelvis, or the form of your pelvis, and then we'll probably be feeling the bones at the back of your pelvis on the back of your hand, or the fingers of your hand. But functionally they're connected. And often one part of our pelvis, or an aspect of our pelvis, is more clear in our self-image than another. Okay. Pause a moment. It's amazing how long we can live our lives without having, a really clear image of our pelvis. And Moshe says, without a clear image of how your pelvis is involved in your action, it's a source of weakness in life, that you don't have access to the power that can be generated physically and emotionally, or connected with our self-image, because it's the large muscles around the pelvis that attach to the legs and the torso that have the most capability to move our mass, to accelerate us, to stop us from moving, to change directions. And yet most people, and you can live your life without knowing your pelvis, but knowing what's possible can generate a sense of ability, enabling, that can be quite surprising. So, please bring the soles of your feet together again. Knees open to the sides. Could you do the seesaw movement of breathing in this configuration? So you can breathe in and expand your chest, pull your belly in. Then breathe out, push your belly out, and shrink your chest. And observe, does this, in this orientation, do you feel the seesaw movement reflected more in the motion of your pelvis, or less? So at first you're not trying to actively roll your pelvis, but to feel how the organization, the coordination of your belly and chest influences. So make it a little smaller and lighter and quicker. Pull your belly in, expand your chest. Shrink your chest, push your belly out. Just smaller and faster, or quicker and lighter. Leave it, take a pause. Come back to the position with your feet, soles of your feet together. And begin to explore moving your pelvis in order to bring your left thigh and knee a little closer to the floor, and then return to the middle. Go slowly. Do less than you can to begin with, till you find out how to organize yourself in your back and your ribs. You may even remember there was a lesson that we did last week where the legs were long and we were rolling the pelvis, trying to use the lower back and feeling how it scooped up the upper body. To give you a fright, sorry. Are you able to let your legs hang open, or is it uncomfortable?
I can, but Julie has told me I like to hang like this.
Oh, and then you lose the connection. That's true.
But I am consciously holding my legs.
Yeah.
They're not relaxed.
So let's just let them open and take your. So leave them hang. Okay. Let them hang as much as you can. Yep. Yeah. Now move your pelvis. That's okay.
Okay. Cool.
So it's when the. So some people have really flexible hips, and their hips really hang open to the sides, and that can interfere if the legs are disconnected. It can really interfere with it. They act like weights to the side, so it's hard to find something else through your back. But once your legs start responding to the movement of your pelvis, it's absolutely fine. So feel, what do you need to do in your lower back on the right side to bring your left thigh a little closer to the floor? You feel your ribs lifting away from the floor a little bit on the right side. Weight shifting onto the left side of your pelvis. Okay. Pause a moment. And when you pause, stand your feet. Come out of the position, because most of us are unaccustomed to lengthening the adductor muscles of the legs in this way. And it can sometimes take a little bit of time for the physical changes, the physical adaptations to catch up with the abilities that we're developing. So we need to listen to what's comfortable, as well as listening to how many times to explore something. When to take a rest. Come back to put your feet together. Soles of your feet together, knees open to the sides, and see what it's like to move your pelvis, shift your weight onto the right side of your pelvis, and lower your right thigh towards the floor. So you could play with how you're initiating this movement. Maybe one side's immediately you feel a difference, one side to the other, which is usually true of both, of everybody. One side of the back is more able to find this particular pattern of action. But instead of thinking about your pelvis, think about directing your right knee forwards in the line of itself, so you're elongating the knee and taking the thigh to the floor. The other knee, the other leg, stays open as much as possible. Danielle?
Yes.
Okay, so just the starting position. Can you open your knees? Is it?
It's just getting pretty sore.
Okay, rest more often then.
Yeah.
Okay, rest more often. And because it's more about not this working as finding something in your back. So rest as often.
I've been moving my back like that and trying to move that out.
Yeah, good. Great. Okay. Pause with your feet standing again. Then come back to the same configuration and roll your pelvis right and left. Just notice, can you compare how you organize your back to take one thigh and knee toward the floor and how you do it on the other side? What happens between your ribs and your pelvis? Feel how the rolling of your pelvis pulls your other leg along for the ride, but check. Is it doing anything, tightening, holding, that's not necessary in the hip joint? And pause. So instead of being an intentional movement of our legs relative to our body, we're now intentionally exploring and investigating the movement of the pelvis. Our intention is to move our pelvis in these different directions. That intention can be experienced as quite a novelty to our brain, to our nervous system, because it's more common to have the intention of moving our legs. Please roll yourself up to sitting. Sit with the soles of your feet together, leaning on your hands behind. Roll your pelvis forwards and backwards several times. See what it's like now. So what I can see, really roll forwards and backwards. So not just one direction. I'm going to say really, I perceive from what I just said that really roll your pelvis means do a big movement. That's not what I mean, okay? But I saw some people who are accenting one direction. So can you be clear what part, the changing relationship of your sit bones to the ground, the changing curve or shape of your back, Now move a little left and right. So you shift your weight more onto one side of your pelvis and move that leg towards the floor, the knee towards the floor. Feel how you can use your opposite hand to help. So if you're going to the left, your right hand can lean into the floor a little bit. If you're going to the right, your left hand can press into the floor a little bit. And check it out. Try pressing with your same hand on the same side that you're moving towards and see, does that help or hinder your intention to lower your thigh to the floor? Rest in sitting. Come back to the same configuration. This time move your head in a backwards direction towards, and if you think of that big clock on the floor, it's moving backwards towards 6, and feel, what do you do with your shoulders, your sternum? And does it make any difference? Does it make it easier to move your pelvis towards 12 to help take your head backwards? Or does 6? How do you breathe as you do that? Can you think of lifting your sternum in the direction of your throat as you move your head backwards? And then letting your sternum slide forwards and downwards, your belly pull in a little bit as you bring your head forwards again. Please rest and take a pause in sitting. Are you interested in your sitting right now and what part of your pelvis you're sitting on? What part of your ischiums you're sitting on? Please lean on your hands behind, bring the soles of your feet together. And begin to explore moving your feet with the soles of your feet together, a little rightward and back to the middle. So you slide your feet on the floor to the right and come back. Slide. Yeah, if you've got a sticky mat, you've got to work out, you may need to reduce the friction. You've got to find out how can you lighten your legs a little bit to reduce the friction in order to slide. So your feet are sliding on the floor and moving to your right, and then do the same thing to the left. Elbows are always softly straight. And think, when you bend your elbows, that creates movement in a place which isn't in your spine. Tends to. So that's why there's the constraint. So slide your feet left and right. And feel... Pardon? Hopefully not. Not if you're doing it easily. Although getting a carpet burn is one way to learn about friction and effort. And I probably have, I'd like to think I don't, but I probably have the gold medal experiences of carpet burn. Because I was invested in getting it. So I had a magnificent carpet burn in a place that I couldn't possibly hide, which is even more embarrassing. Okay, so what stops you from going further? Left and right like this. So there are different ways of doing this. Come back to the middle. Roll back onto your pelvis a little bit. Pull your abdomen in. So then the movement becomes more of a, what sort of action of your legs on your pelvis, yourself? It's a swivel. You're pivoting on your butt, on the back of your sacrum. Yeah? So you don't have to do too much with your back or your spine. The shape of your back can stay relatively the same. Okay. So pause in the middle. Think of getting taller and pushing your belly forwards a little bit in the direction of the thigh that you're moving towards. So if you're sliding your feet to the right, you're thinking of pushing your belly forward toward the thigh on the right side. And then when you stay forward and erect as much as you can, shift your weight across your pelvis, pushing your belly forwards, and you may just start to discover that there's an organisation of your spine and a turning around your ischium on one side. But if you're folded and rounded, it's not possible. So maybe you need to try putting your arms in a different position if it's difficult for you to keep your elbows straight, or turn your hands in a different position. Yeah? Sit bone, thank you. Thank you, Silvana. So the sit bone, most people know it as a sit bone, is also called the ischium. Pardon? More or less, yes. It's asking something of your back. Next time you take your legs to the right, stay there and explore, pushing your abdomen out in the direction of your right thigh. And can your right thigh stay where it is? So it doesn't lift towards your torso, but your pelvis moves towards your leg. Just a little bit. What happens between your ribs and your pelvis on your left side as you do that? And how are you using your shoulders? Help if the right shoulder comes a little forwards and a little downwards perhaps. Okay, try the same movement to the other side. Slide your legs to the other side. Protrude your abdomen in the direction of your left thigh, so your left thigh is lowering towards the floor. Weight will be more on your left ischium, your left sit bone, the left side of your pelvis. And you're thinking of directing your belly button along a line down the line of your thigh. That's it. And come back and do it again. So your legs, you can slide your legs to in either side, stay there, roll your pelvis forwards and backwards in that position. And as you roll your pelvis forwards and backwards, can you think of expanding your abdomen, thinking of pushing your abdomen forwards, feeling what that invites through your spine, particularly your lower back and your ribs at the back, your ribs at the front on the left side. No, you can keep your hands where they are. If you need to support yourself, but basically it's organising your spine to change its orientation, its action, rather than the hands. So you're learning how to move your pelvis. But you see, it's not easy. It highlights, how far we've gone in life and can function very well without knowing how to use our pelvis well. What's possible for our pelvis. Okay, please come back to the middle. Feet together, lean your hands behind you, and simply lightly roll your pelvis forwards and backwards. See what that's like now. Any different? Is more of you involved? How are your legs connecting to the movement now? And lie on your back. Please bend your knees, stand your feet. Roll your pelvis a little bit, headward, footward, and notice what that's like now. So here, when we bring the feet to standing, it can connect with other possibilities of using ourselves. But in this context, it gives you the possibility of feeling the change that may have happened when you roll your pelvis and how that movement travels through your spine, transmits and connects along your spine to your head. Maybe you use your feet more, maybe you use your feet less. But something will have changed from not using your feet in the usual ways, the known ways. Lengthen your legs. Sense the line of your spine. And then the image of your spine and its contact with the floor. Your pelvis. What sense do you have of yourself there now? Its volume, its depth, its width. And your head. Shape, volume. Roll your head a little right, a little left. Leave that and slowly take your time, sensing yourself as you move. Roll yourself to one side, bring yourself up to standing. And notice what's the after effect, the lingering experience of yourself in standing from this lesson, from these explorations. What sense do you have of the ground, of your weight, your height? Lighter or heavier, taller or shorter? Begin to walk. And as you walk, can you have the sense of your pelvis moving towards somewhere? The front of your pelvis moving towards somewhere? The back of your pelvis moving away from somewhere? And then walk a little backwards. You have a sense of your pelvis moving towards somewhere. The front of your pelvis moving away from somewhere. And then just walk any way you'd like. Noticing what interests you.